I should tell everyone that I'm not an accountant. I was a licensed financial planner for about 25 years in Australia, and I know lots and lots of stuff, and I can speak from my personal experience, but nothing I say is official recommendations. It's like getting guide advice from your friends. You've got to check with your doctor as well and make sure it's applicable to you. So I can have a chat to you, I can answer questions, and I can put you in touch with people who are experts in the field. It's interesting. A lot of people want to go and talk to their accountant about their tax and their taxation structures without actually realizing who the accountants are, who the accountants work for, and how that system works. So a lot of people are very surprised when they find out that the ATO is not a government department. It's totally not government. It's a privately owned company. In Australia, we have government departments. So we have the Defence Department, we have the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Affairs Department, we have the Immigration Department, we have all these different departments, but we don't have a tax department. We have the Australian Taxation Office, which is a private corporation. It's basically a licensed debt collector who works for the government, but is not part of the government. Same as the Australian Electoral Commission is not part of the government either. It's not a government department. They're an independent contractor who basically tries to convince you to enrol to vote so that you'll spend the next 40, 50 years of your life voting. But if you never signed a contract with the AEC saying that you will vote, then you don't have to vote. This is why at the moment you're seeing ads on Facebook, you're seeing ads on TV, the AEC saying, please come and enrol to vote, because enrolling to vote is not compulsory. But once you have actually enrolled to vote, then you've signed a contract saying you will vote. And if you don't vote, then they can actually penalise you. You're breaking the contract. And similar thing with the ATO. If you've signed a contract with the ATO saying, I'll give you 30% of my wages for the rest of my life, if you don't do that, then you can get penalised. But
can we get out of that contract?
Yes and no. Technically, once you've signed the contract, you're in the contract. So you as an individual, John Smith signed the contract, but then you can actually start another structure. So when I first started out in financial planning, I was just a sole trader. I didn't know any better. And it was just me, myself, registered. Once I started to make decent money, once I started to pay a fair amount of tax, the accountant said to me, hey, you can form a company, and instead of paying 48% tax, you'll pay 30% tax. And I went, yay. So I formed a company. And then the company signed a contract with the ATO saying they'll pay 30% tax. But I was better off. So I was saying thank you to the accountant, even though the accountant's still helping them to take a third of my wage. A couple of years later, I started a couple of other retail businesses and things. And the accountant said to me, oh, you're paying too much tax. You should open a family trust. And there's family trusts and hybrid trusts and discretionary trusts and all sorts of different trusts that you can have. And probably some people on the call have got. Through the trust, I could actually pay 15% tax instead of 30% tax. And I thought this was fantastic as well. But still, the accountant is actually working for the ATO. It's the ATO who licenses him to give advice. If there's a structure out there that enables you to pay 1% tax or 2% tax or even 0% tax, he's not going to tell you about it, because the accountant doesn't want you to stop coming in. That's basically his business. And he's not going to give you advice that runs contrary to what the ATO says he can tell you, otherwise he's going to lose his license. There are structures available, and there's plenty of people using them, but you won't get this advice from an ordinary accountant who's actually licensed by the ATO. You have to find yourself a pure accountant. Income tax came in Australia in 1915. So it was only 100 years ago. Income tax came in the USA in 1913, again, around about 100 years ago for the First World War, to fund the war effort. It was supposed to be repealed in 1918 when the war ended, but by that stage they had so many people looking after the tax, so many accountants looking after it, so many politicians administrating it, they didn't want to give up their jobs, they didn't want to lose the money. So income tax just stayed in. Before we had income tax, there was 150 years of US history, 150 years of Australian history, where we didn't have any income tax, yet there were still roads, there were still schools, there were still hospitals, there was still an army and a navy and this sort of stuff. That money actually came out of general revenue. There was sales taxes on things. Every time you bought a packet of chips or every time you bought a car, there was a sales tax, but you didn't need to report on what your income was. You didn't need to submit tax returns. That's something that's only relatively recent. And again, pure accountants. There was accountants around for hundreds of years before income tax came in. But now you're dealing with tax agents. So it's very, very rare to find a pure accountant. And I've been lucky enough to find a couple over the last 20 years and really lift the lid on this system and say, hey, what's going on? Because once you find out that the ATO is not a government department, you start to ask questions. Once you've stepped outside of the matrix, you can go back into the matrix, but it looks completely different to how you thought things were.
Wow, this just takes it to a whole nother level. So for those of us that signed a contract, clearly all of us, what do you do in the case what do I do? Like, rip up my contract that I signed and hide? What do you do? I don't like this. This is awful.
Well, when you've got your own business, it's a lot simpler.
Okay.
You know, for myself, I was running a few businesses, and I could start companies and I could start trusts and things like that. There's special structures that you can start that aren't actually under the jurisdiction of the Australian Taxation Office, simply because if you don't give them the authority, they don't have it. You've got the authority yourself. They don't have the authority over you. You can have these structures that have perhaps an ACN but don't have a tax file number. And the tax commissioner can knock on your door, the Prime Minister of Australia can knock on your door and say, show us your bank records, and you can just say, sorry, you don't have any jurisdiction over me. You don't have any authority over me.
Love this.
Completely legal.
Is that only if you don't have a tax file number?
On the entity.
Yes.
On the structure. So as an employee, it's difficult because you're contracted to, like, let's say you're working for Hewlett Packard. HP has got you on the books as an employee. They pay your taxes for you. But as a business owner, you've got control over whether you run your business through a company, through a trust, or through some other sort of structure. So it's very, very easy for you in your situation to say, okay, the business and the business can actually run through this entity. As for what I do as an employee, it's not impossible to escape the tax system. It's just a little bit harder, a little bit more complicated, because it relies on the person who's actually writing checks out to you.
Cool. So, wow. So really we need to look at different ways of not avoiding paying taxes, but sort of being creative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's also asset protection. I think I talked last week about someone who had a couple of different businesses and was running them through the same structure. Every now and then in business, depends, if you're in nursing, you might accidentally stab someone with a needle, or if you're in construction, one of your houses might fall down and someone's going to sue you. Yeah. And if they sue you, they can take whatever's in your name. They can take your house, they can take your car, they can take your business. But if the business or the house or the car happens to be in the name of another structure, Cameron Family Trust or something like that, it's not actually yours. Technically, it's not yours. It's owned by your family trust, which is a separate legal entity. And because the family trust is a piece of paper, the piece of paper doesn't make a building fall down. The piece of paper doesn't stab someone with a needle. So the piece of paper is very, very, very unlikely to get sued. And that's a way of protecting your assets and keeping what you've worked so hard for, whether it's your income or whether it's your assets, protecting those to make sure no one else can get them.
So why doesn't everyone know about you?
Why doesn't everybody know that the ATO is not a government department?
Why
because it's not in their best interest to know that. Why doesn't everyone know that income tax is optional? It's not in the government's best interest to have you know that. But you've got companies out there, I'm sure you've seen some of this stuff getting around the press recently, where Google made $2 billion and they paid 2.5% tax. Apple made over $8 billion and they pay 1% tax. Facebook, who's paid 1%, and GE, who paid 1%. Amazon, Disney, Microsoft, Australian Energy, Dell, Dropbox, PayPal, all of these guys are paying less than 2% tax. They're doing it legally. And when people find out about it, they go, oh, that's unfair and Google should be paying more tax and blah, 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 blah. But if they're doing it legally, what are you going to do? If you're on a scooter doing 70 miles flat out on the highway and someone passes you doing 120, don't complain about them. Just say, how can I get a car that does 120? You know, you're not Amish. If you grew up on an Amish farm, you wouldn't know any better. You wouldn't even know there's cars. But once you actually see what's available, it's available to you as well. And if everybody was paying 1% tax, you know what? That's actually a fair system. Whether Google pays 1% or you pay 1%, if the government doesn't like it, they're going to have to change it for everybody. It's unfair that Google and Apple and Microsoft and these guys can get away with it. You can't, simply because you don't know how. No one's told you.
But you know how.
Absolutely.
Excellent. That's
Absolutely.
why we
It took me a long time to find out. When you first start out financial planning, you're investing Mrs. Buddy Duddy's $30,000 and you're messing with some guy's super. It takes you a long time before you actually get to meet millionaires and billionaires. Once you get to meet the millionaires and billionaires, you find out they do business very, very differently because they know the law. They actually spend time reading the Australian Constitution and reading the Bills of Exchange Act and the Currencies Act and the Taxation Act and finding out all of these things are optional. But we're brought up to say, you must vote, it's the law. You must pay tax, it's the law. And people just believe that, but no one ever actually checks the documentation. The Constitution's not a long document. You can read through it in less than an hour. And once you read through it, you find out, you know what? I don't have to do this. So why am I doing it?
Yes, I like this.
Mind blown.
I'm just thinking of my dad and the amount of tax. He's got a truck company.
Yeah.
And the amount of tax he pays is phenomenal.
Yeah. As I say, it's very, very easy when you've got your own business because it's just basically grabbing a bit of paper and creating a new entity. When I'm saying Google and Apple and these kind of guys pay 1 or 2% tax, that's absolutely correct. But not saying they're rat bags, they just do it legally. Then they choose to sponsor different causes. They choose to give money away to charity. Because when you've got a gun to your head saying, give me 30% of your wages, you kind of do it begrudgingly. But once the gun is taken away and you say, oh, now I've got 100% of my money, I might choose to get passionate about, I might want to build a library. I might want to donate a wing to the hospital. I might want to do this. I might want to do that. And before 1915, when we had the museums and the hospitals and the roads and the schools, they were paid for by the community. Rich people in the community would actually become generous because they weren't paying tax. They wanted to give back. And this is what I like to do.
So basically we all need to get an appointment with you so you can sort out our lives.
Basically, yeah, just have a chat because everybody's different. We were talking before about the pharmacists. Everybody's got a different medical condition and there's not just pharmaceutical drugs that can fix that. There's a range of natural alternatives as well. For most business owners, it's a very, very simple process. The reason your accountant isn't telling you about it is because there's no money in for him. If you don't keep coming back and if you don't keep submitting your shoebox full of receipts and paying him to lodge the taxes, then he's going to lose money. Accountants used to do this in the olden days before income tax came in. They just had to work a little bit harder and be a lot nicer because it's optional.
Did anyone who's on this call know about this? Can you raise your hand?
No.
Wow. Oh, you can't.
No, one.
One.
For ones that we do, there's a startup cost, obviously, because you've got to employ the services of the accountant, the solicitor, and that sort of stuff to do it. But once it's set up, it just runs. It just runs, and you don't have to pay another cent for as long as you live.
Oh, really? Shit.
Maybe contacting you then, Jeremy.
Jeremy, a question here.
Yep. If you want to spend, say, $10,000 on structures to save $50,000 on tax, then that's a decision that you make. That's probably worthwhile. But if you want to spend $10,000 on structures and you're only saving $12,000 on tax, it might not be worth your while. It's just a lot of mucking around for not much benefit. It's individual case by case. People on this call who are making, truckloads of money. There's some people on this call who are making a little bit of money, but will be making truckloads later on. And it just comes down to what's suitable for the individual at the time.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
We've got our business, that's for sure. We'll be in touch.
It's definitely possible. It's just whether it's easy for you or whether it's too complicated. And that's a call that you make. I'll ask you a whole bunch of questions about diagnosing your situation and then say, okay, for you, it's going to cost this and it's going to involve this and it's going to involve this. You don't need to fly to the Cayman Islands. I'll just put that out there now. You don't need to go to Hong Kong. You don't need to fly overseas to set up different bank accounts and that sort of stuff. It's very, very simple. It's done from Australia. We use Australian banks, Australian bank accounts. It's very, very simple, but it's just whether it's worthwhile for you. And that's the choice that you make by yourself.
Cool.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting. So is there many people doing this with businesses?
There is. I find it hard to get stats in Australia because Australia has different privacy legislation. But in the US, it's a lot easier to find out, which is why those companies that I said before, Google and Facebook and PayPal and eBay, they're mostly American companies except for Energy Australia. In America, there's over 491,000 people earning up to $10 million a year. So we're not talking they're actual millionaires in assets. They're making $10 million a year. Almost 500,000 Americans making $10 million a year who pay zero tax. That's the statistics. That's the Bureau of Statistics stuff.
So what
in
happens
Australia,
to
it's
all
hard to find out.
What happens to all the welfare people that are on?
That's a really great question. I'll flip it back. You probably know that the politicians are fat. You probably know that the politicians charter private helicopters to go to their sister's wedding and this sort of stuff. Right now, we've got a truckload of politicians who are bringing in about $500,000 a year, plus their $800,000 expense account, which is they always spend that, they always blow that. Politics is really ineffective. Money they're taking in and saying we're supporting the poor and we're giving to the pensioners. Around about 70% of that isn't getting to the end recipient. In fact, only about 10% of the money is actually going into social causes, and that includes the pensions, the welfare, the building of the hospitals, the roads, that sort of stuff. Only around about 10% of the money that's going to the government actually gets into the hands of the end recipient, which is interesting. If anyone's got the religious bent, back in the day, before there was income tax 100 years ago, they used to say, give away 10% to the poor. And the communities and the towns, if there was a poor homeless person in your town, people would give them money. The community would support them. And if everybody wanted a school, they would all chip in together and they would build a school. And that's how people did things before the government actually took it out of our hands and said, we're going to take the money, we're going to look after it, we're going to do the social justice thing. But 70 to 90% of the money gets wasted on the government who are actually trying to administer this thing. If you want to support the poor, absolutely support the poor. And that's what a lot of Google and Apple and Microsoft vaccinating children, and they want to do good things, but they do it without the government because the government is very, very wasteful.
Wow.
And I'm saying that on record. It's being
Have
recorded.
you got like have you got a clear calendar? Because I have a feeling you'll be getting a few phone calls.
Well, I have an electronic calendar, so people can jump onto choosemycoach.com. They can just go, okay, I want to talk to you 2 o'clock Wednesday or 4 o'clock Friday or whatever. That's entirely up to you.
Cool.
Do you have a phone number there at all, please, Jeremy?
Easiest way to jump onto choosemycoach.com, and you can actually find where I'm available and click on that, and actually give you the Skype details and the mobile numbers, and
Right, thank you.
that'll make sure I actually take your call, because obviously if you try to call me now, I'm on the call, I'm not going to answer. So welcome.
Very good.
For people